Okay, so Chwarae, for those of you who don't know who Chwarae are, for almost 30 years now, we have been working to eradicate gender inequality, and we are working to ensure that women can enter the workplace, build rewarding careers, develop skills, and enter the workplace and have the progressive careers that they absolutely deserve. We have a vision of a Wales where every woman and girl is treated equally and is fully able to participate in public and political life and live safe from violence and fear. We offer a number of services at Chwarae that can help support girls, women and businesses across Wales, and we also work closely with government to ensure our country is fair and inclusive for women and to ensure that they have a platform for their voices to be heard. A bit later on today, we'll be hearing a bit more about some of the products and services that we can offer your businesses. But first off, we'll kick things off with the Hive community. So Hive is all about bringing together employers from across the sectors in Wales to learn from each other and share best practice and look at how they can implement and embed modern working practices that benefit everybody. Hive, in a usual circumstance, we would be running face-to-face live events across Wales, but in the last year we have actually moved the community online and running virtual sessions for you and discussing a variety of topics that are really important to businesses in Wales today. So today we're looking at societies with disability and what this means for your business. We are joined by three amazing speakers. We've got Dr. Hade Turkmen from Chwarae, who will be sharing the research findings from our recently published Societies with Disability report. And we'll also be hearing from Hade and Miranda from Disability Wales on the recommendations and the practical advice that we can give to employers today so they can take away and encourage them to make the adjustments that will help attract, retain and progress people that identify as having a disability into the workplace. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Stephen Beyer as well from Cardiff University and the National Centre for Mental Health. Stephen's going to be sharing the work that he's been doing, some of the research that he's been carrying out, and also talking to us about the business benefits of employing people with disabilities. And also, I believe he's going to be sharing the results of the Engage to Change programme that Learning Disability Wales have been delivering across Wales. So looking forward to hearing a bit more about that. So I'm going to hand you over to Hade now, who's going to talk to you about our research. Let me just make you presenter, Hade. There we go.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see that great. If you want to pop it into a slideshow, it should work. There we go, it looks great.
Sorry, there we are. Oops, going faster than I expected, sorry. Hey everyone, I'm Hade Turkmen. I'm a research partner at Chwarae and carrying out research and doing policy, working with policy and research team to provide evidence for policymakers in Wales. And I'm going to present you today the report that we published in 2020, just after the pandemic has kicked off. And this report explores the experiences of disabled women and work, and that I hope it will set as the scene for the discussion later. Just want to warn you that we collect the data before pandemic, so lots of things has changed particularly for disabled people and people with health conditions during the pandemic. So these are the results of a general our normal life, not the new normal, but I think these are still quite relevant and we need to discuss. So very briefly, what I'm going to cover today is why we look at this research topic, a quick point on the definitions and the approach that we took to the research, some key figures to give you a bit of a background, disabled women's experiences in some key areas of employment, such as recruitment and retention at work, and last but not least, some recommendations focusing on those that are most relevant from an employer's perspective. And then I will hand over to Miranda to discuss these recommendations. So to start with, why did we look at this topic? Chwarae are unambiguous that when we talk about achieving gender equality, we mean equality for all women in Wales. In order to achieve this, we need to take an intersectional approach and focus on the women who face the greatest barriers and disadvantage first. To do this properly, we need to understand the lived experience of diverse women. We often rely on national data sets, but the inequality experienced differently by different groups, and often this differentiated experiences are not reflected in the discussions properly. We wanted to carry out this research to plug those evidence gaps and to ensure disabled women's voices are heard. So in Chwarae, we believe that Wales cannot call itself a gender equal nation until all women are able to live their lives free from discrimination, violence, and oppression, and are able to experience fair, equitable outcomes. Embedding a truly intersectional approach into policymaking is imperative, an approach that recognizes how characteristics such as gender, race, ethnicity, faith, disability, age, sexuality, and class continue to shape access to power, influence, resources, and privilege. And before I get into the details of the research, I want to make a quick point about the definitions that we use, which are quite important to comprehend where we are doing wrong in our approach to disability in general. Historically, in the UK, disability was defined using the medical model of disability, which views a person's impairment as disabling, preventing them from doing tasks in the same way as a non-disabled person. In contrast, under the social disability model, disability is caused by how society is organized, and disability refers to the barriers that people with impairments and or long-term health conditions experience. These can be attitudinal, institutional, communicational, and or environmental. Under the social model, addressing these barriers is a collective and societal responsibility rather than an individual one. In this research and in all that we do as an organization, we apply the social model of disability, which is widely regarded as the best practice. So the methodology of the research, I'm just going to quickly go over. The central questions that we explored in this research was, what are the experiences if disabled women in accessing and progressing in work and or the Welsh economy? The research explored existing statistical evidence as well as gathering data from an online survey and a series of focus groups. Consideration was given to the barriers that disabled women encounter, the accessibility of employability and support programs, and the changes that disabled women would like to see. The online survey was open to women and men, and in total we had 195 usable responses. In addition, we had 3 focus groups in Cardiff, Swansea, and Wrexham, through which we spoke to 15 women. Before discussing the figures, I would like to highlight that the experiences of disabled women can vary considerably depending on their impairment or health condition. In this research, we didn't focus on a specific disability or health condition, and we do make some generalization as a research does. But disabled women and women with long-term health conditions might have varieties depending on their conditions. So when we are discussing the recommendations, please bear in mind that people might need different approaches. Before the research findings, I would like to give you general figures about where disabled women are in Welsh economy. So disabled women comprise 14% of the total working age population. There are more working age disabled women with 55% than disabled men. And latest figures show that 53.7% of disabled women in Wales are employed compared to 55.3% of disabled men and 80.2% of non-disabled women and 86.2% of non-disabled men. Despite being highly qualified, disabled women have lower participation rates in higher skilled occupations and are less likely to advance in their careers. And the unemployment figures of disabled women are 6.6%, which is 2.9% for non-disabled women and 7.7% for disabled men and 3.2% for non-disabled men. Economic inactivity rates of disabled women are 46.3% compared to 44.7% of disabled men and 19.8% for non-disabled women. The table on the slide also shows the disability pay gap by gender. A comparison of the median hourly earnings of disabled men and women to non-disabled men shows all three other groups are substantially worse off compared to non-disabled men. However, disabled women face the largest pay gap with 26.5%. Based on the responses from disabled women to the survey and as part of the focus group, it was clear that women encounter barriers entering work, but also within work. It was also clear that support programs that are in place for disabled people are not necessarily effective. I will going to discuss job seeking and recruitment in this couple of slides coming through. So 47% of disabled women respondents to survey agree or strongly agree with the statement, I have found it difficult to secure employment because of my impairment or health condition. This is almost half of the survey respondents. While this report shows that barriers to disabled women's employment come from external sources, confidence and self-esteem is an important issue as it's knocked by repeated negative experiences, as the code says in the slide. I think if people could understand how much it can destroy your life in terms of your confidence and your ability to feel that you are actually a valuable, functioning human being. Disabled women's lack of confidence partly stems from their prior negative experiences as employees and job seekers. Repeated knocks to an individual's confidence and self-esteem can be exhausting, and this makes it harder to disabled women to challenge employment barriers. Interventions to build confidence are important, but there is a close correlation between the external barriers and confidence of individuals, and if external barriers are not also addressed with trying to boost the confidence of disabled people, success will be limited. We ask participants about disclosing their disability or health condition while they are applying for a job. As you can see in the graphic, men are more likely to disclose their disability and health condition on job applications with 62% to 39% of women. However, the disparity is not replicated once employed, with 85% of disabled women saying that they had spoken to their employer about their impairment or health condition compared to 62% of disabled men. Findings suggest gender is an important factor in shaping if and in what circumstances disabled people disclose their condition to a potential employer. This could be about confidence, could be due to the women's concerns about multiple discrimination they could face, or other factors. But this is not clear from our research what the reasons for this difference is, but further investigation could offer important insights to help employers become more inclusive. The recruitment processes emerge as a critical issue in our research. 48% of disabled women disagree or strongly disagree that job applications and interviews are accessible to and inclusive of disabled people, but crucial to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. Accessible and inclusive recruitment processes will be ineffective if jobs and career pathways are not developed with the needs of disabled staff at the forefront. A women's survey respondent highlighted that the starting point in any recruitment process is to identify ways the employers can make the role more accessible and offer flexibility. Inclusive and accessible recruitment processes should ask applicants who disclose an impairment or health condition what support and adjustment they need. And when thinking about accessibility, we need to think about the whole process to avoid issues such as those raised by one participant, as you can see the quote on the slide. Even when you go for a job interview and you say you are in a wheelchair, and they say we are accessible. Yes, you can get in the door, but you are given a table that you can't get up to. There are some interventions that can be applied by the employers, one of which is, for example, guaranteed interview scheme. Interventions such as guaranteed interview must be used authentically to support people with disabilities into the workplace and not as a tick box exercise, and need to be consistently evaluated and adopted. Regarding the recruitment processes, participants outlined a number of simple steps that believe would address the issues in the recruitment processes. These can be summarized as making straightforward changes to improve accessibility and inclusiveness when recruiting, such as letting candidates know where the toilets are in the building when they arrive for their interview. Be proactive and ask their adjustment they need to perform at their best. Ideally, this conversation should be initiated by a named staff member who is not on the recruitment panel, such as a disability champion who is suitably trained. Collecting and monitoring equalities and diversity data is important in affecting real change. However, it was felt strongly by participants that this information should not be made available to interview or shortlisting panels. Providing clear details of the organization's flexible working practices and not only stating that flexible working is available is important. Alongside this, being open and clear about the sickness policies are important for disabled people and people with health conditions. Increasing and improving the level of training and information available to all staff, and particularly HR teams and staff involved in shortlisting and interviewing, was another key theme, along with ensuring that unconscious bias does not seep into the criteria on job descriptions, creating barriers before job seekers have an open the application form. Women and men flagged how standard criteria, which appear regularly in job descriptions, can exclude disabled applicants. In addition, making the job description accessible should be one of the first steps that employers take. In addition to these broad themes, participants made a number of specific and important suggestions, which can be found in the full report in our website. Overall, respondents to our survey reported positive experience at work. 69% of disabled women reported positive experiences, while 31% reported negative experiences. Disabled women have positive experiences in work when they have flexibility in their role, adoptions that enable them to do their job to the best ability, the best of their ability, good communication with managers and HR, and a satisfying job with a company with shared values, openness and willingness to learn, adopt, and listen to disabled employees about the best way to support them has a big impact on disabled women's experiences. Other aspects of work, communication, respect, and social aspects have a bearing on disabled women's experiences. Employers who do not think through the impact of decision-making and policy change on colleagues with impairments and health conditions negatively affect disabled employees' experiences. While good managers can have a very positive impact, changes in personal or poor managers can sour that experience. Neither can a good manager make up for poor or ineffective policies. Also, not being believed, listened to, or respected at work made women's experiences negative, and this is particularly an issue for women with invisible impairments and health conditions. Some of the research participants underlined that they work hard not to let their pain affect their work, but this also makes it difficult to be believed that they are in pain. Women with health conditions and non-visible disabilities are more prone to not to be believed and taken seriously. The quote on the slide, as the quote on the slide says, a manager when I was teaching said to me, well, could you let us know, say on the Friday, if you're going to be ill on the Monday? And he kept telling me I was hiding behind my disability. These are quite intrusive and upsetting experiences. In our research, a number of common themes that have significant impact on experiences in work emerge from the participants. Discrimination is one of them. 58% of women who responded have faced prejudice or inappropriate attitudes from their employer or their colleagues. What was clear is that discrimination thrives when negative attitudes toward disabled people go unchecked. Disabled women are trying to work to manage their impairments and health conditions, whilst counteracting discriminatory and bullying attitudes from individuals in and out of work who find support for their views in national papers and from policies that test disabled people's right to financial and other forms of support, such as personal independence payments. One of the research participants voiced her experience as such. They are putting down copies of the Daily Mail on your desk about benefit fraud and things that you are like, oh, God's sake, here we go again. Discrimination can manifest itself in a different way, however, with some participants highlighting the negative impact of well-meaning colleagues and managers who question and doubt people's ability to do their jobs. Ultimately, there is a lack of knowledge and understanding about how best to support disabled people in the workplace, and fear and anxiety about getting it wrong. Workplace adjustment is another theme came through in our research. On workplace adjustments, we found that 76% of women respondents have requested workplace adjustments compared to 57% of men. The majority of requests are for workstation adjustments and equipment, followed by flexible working. Around half of our respondents reported that their employer had made appropriate and reasonable adjustments, but did also hear stories of workspaces simply not being fit for the purpose. Take, for example, one participant who had to wait. I also had to wait for a long time for a ramp to get out at the closest fire exit, so I had to either wait in the building if there was a fire or go along a way around to get out of the building. Flexible working requests is another theme came along. Overwhelmingly, both women and men respondents to the survey had their flexible working requests accepted, 76% of women and 71% of men. There were, however, some issues around the time of our medical appointments, which is a right guaranteed under the Equality Act. However, we did hear from participants who were asked to use sick leave or to make up the time, which was compounding anxiety. Women thought about needing the time off. A number of women spoke about feeling guilty and concerned about how colleagues might view them. And finally, on career progression, more women than men agreed or strongly agreed that they had been treated less favorably because of their gender. 32% of women compared to 6% of men. There's a gender difference in women and men's experience of promotion. 41% of women and 31% of men disagreed or strongly disagreed that they have a clear progression path. Insufficient support to help disabled women progress in their career, coupled with lack of understanding about impairments and health conditions, creates a situation where women are unable to progress as they should. And the support programs are quite important for disabled people's access to employment. Among them, Access to Work is one of the main UK government administrated schemes to support disabled people at work. Two main criticisms of Access to Work emerged from the research. The first was that employers do not know about Access to Work and how it can help them to employ, retain and support employees with disabilities. Secondly, respondents raised concern about the effectiveness of Access to Work in supporting employees and self-employed people in work since it has been reviewed. Adjustments have largely positive effects when put in place promptly, but this is not happening in all cases, and some participants reported issues with the Access to Work assessment itself, as one of the survey respondent codes shows. Participants also discussed the Disability Confidence Scheme. Being a disability confident employer certainly had an impact on whether disabled people applied for some roles, but there were some concerns that it can be approached in a tokenistic tick box manner, particularly around lower levels of the scheme, the criteria for which can be met without doing much to change practical issues or culture. So the solutions, women with impairments and health conditions face distinct and greatest barriers to employment than women without. Action is needed across businesses, governments, trade unions, and across society, and echoing other organizations' findings. Our research strongly indicates that employers have a central role in increasing the number of disabled women in work. Our report outlines a number of steps business can take. First, aim beyond legal minimums for best practice, make full use of existing schemes, engage meaningfully with disability confident, and use resources from business players and others. Second, collect and publish equality and diversity data. Collect data on disability and gender and calculate your disability pay gap. And third, review and revise recruitment processes at all stages. Ask disabled candidates what they need, provide information to candidates about accessing and navigating the building, and train those involved in recruitment. 4, improve compulsory equality and diversity training and unconscious bias training. Co-produce training with disabled people or use training developed by specialist organizations. 5, ensure workplace policies are constantly and robustly applied. Review internal policies, carry out equality impact assessments, offer flexible working to all, and investigate and implement best practice. 6, support disabled employees effectively, make reasonable adjustments, use schemes like access to work, guarantee time off for appointments, and work with disabled employees to improve culture and practice. I came to the end of my presentation. There are more about the solutions and further discussions in our full report. So, so you can access it through from our website. And I will hand over to Miranda now to reflect on our report and discuss about the potential solutions.
Thanks, Hade. Yeah, we're just going to hand over to Miranda now. We are getting some questions in through from the audience as well, but we'll come to those at the end of the presentations, if that's okay. So if anybody else has any questions that they want to put to Hade, Miranda or Stephen today, then please just pop them into the questions tab and we will get back to you due after the presentations. Okay. Miranda, you all okay? Yeah, great.
I think I'm on the camera. Hi, everybody. Just to say, I haven't got any slides, so I'm just going to be responding verbally. Thank you for that, Hade. We have been really pleased. So I'm Miranda Evans. I'm Policy and Programmes Manager at Disability Wales. We're the National Association of Disabled People's Organisations here in Wales. We campaign for the rights, equality and independence of all disabled people. So the focus for us is about removing disabling barriers and the promotion of disabled people's human rights rather than focusing on any particular impairment or health condition. We welcome this report and we're very pleased to work alongside Chwarae in reaching out to disabled people across our membership and in particular disabled women. It's a very important issue. For many years, since, well, gosh, it's always been quite high up the agenda. Employment rights for disabled people quite often are denied. Very lack of opportunities available for disabled people to gain work experience and enter the workplace, and to have a CV that's that's compatible with other people applying for jobs. So as an organisation, we work. So Hade mentioned the social model of disability. So I want to start with that really. So as an organisation, we actively promote the recognition of the social model of disability. The social model tells us it's something that's been created by the disability movement over a number of years, 1970s actually, and it's an answer to it provides a light really on how disabled people are disadvantaged within society and what holds us back as people living with impairments and health conditions. So it is society that disables us. It's the daily disabling barriers that we are confronted with. So whether that be people's attitudes, disabling environments, the physical makeup of buildings, for instance, accessing workplace stations can be very problematic. And that is the focus really, that's the social model's focus. So it's about how we provide solutions to that and how we break down those barriers to ensure that disabled people can work alongside non-disabled people on an equal level, as it should be. So we very much welcome this report. It's excellent to have such a focus on the issues that disabled women and disabled people in general experience in relation to employment. So Disability Wales as an organisation, I just want to alert you to this. So we're an organisation that is run and controlled by disabled people. So we've been employing disabled people since 1972, when we first established ourselves. So we all have that lived experience. And I suppose I'm talking right now from that lived experience. I'm a disabled woman. And, you know, I've had employment issues happening for many years throughout my career. So it does come from the heart, I think, you know, when I'm actually talking to you now about some of the issues that disabled people are confronted with. And for a woman, it's often a double whammy. So we are disadvantaged because we are a woman. So there is this gender discrimination, but we're also disadvantaged because we are disabled. So we call it the double whammy in many respects, really, which is can be very debilitating and quite oppressive, and it has a huge impact on disabled people's own self-belief, confidence, and ability to get out there and play an active part along with everybody else. So attitude is one of the biggest barriers, and Hade has highlighted that. So attitudes of employers, attitudes of colleagues in the workplace towards someone who has an impairment or health condition. And quite often that's down to lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding about how different barriers impact on people's daily living. So from a social model point of view, the focus is on those barriers. So we would never put the focus on the individual. So we'd never look at someone who has a mental health condition, a learning difficulty, a physical or sensory impairment and say they are the problem. We would look at the environment that they are working in and how we can adapt that environment to ensure that we get the best out of that person and that person feels fully supported by their line managers and the organisation they're representing and working for. So quite often disabled people are very valuable assets to organisations. Are very grateful actually to eventually have employment opportunities presented to them because it's quite a competitive market, and quite often people are at a disadvantage compared to non-disabled people applying for jobs. I'm quite nervous about actually talking openly about some of the barriers that they are experiencing because they don't want to feel that they are any less a person compared to someone that doesn't have an impairment or health condition. So it's a big area, but I think what we want to see, and I really welcome this from the report, is that there's a huge need for the focus to be on creating inclusive workplaces and inclusive policies within the workplace, rather than focusing on the individuals themselves. So we need that shift. We need that shift in thinking. So to look at how we can actually provide solutions to those barriers. And one way is through the introduction of training, as Hade has mentioned. So we actually promote the disability equality training, which comes from a social model approach, a human rights approach, which talks about some of the barriers that disabled people are confronted with within the workplace and how we can actually work collaboratively to break down those barriers. And people always think, we hear these myths around disabled people are expensive, it's going to cost me a fortune to employ disabled people. It's a total myth. That is not the case. And disabled people are very productive, enthusiastic, loyal members of staff because of the barriers they've actually had to go through to get a job and to feel respected along with other people. There are schemes available, such as access to work. Hade mentions that in the report, but very few employers and disabled people themselves are aware of that scheme. So as an organisation, we try to actively promote that scheme and increase people's awareness that it's available. And it helps to fund necessary equipment, for instance, assistive technologies that enable people to do their jobs in the workplace along with other people. It also looks at the ergonomics of people's workstations. It can provide things like office chairs, it can provide note takers, it can help with people's transport barriers. For instance, if someone's visually impaired, they could actually apply to secure some funds towards the employment of a driver, for instance, or a PA that will enable them to do their job along with everyone else. So there are ways around things, there are solutions to barriers that people are confronted with. Where there's a will, there's a way, and I think that is a very valid point. And but people often put up a barrier really and don't see past that barrier. like I said, we are an organisation of disabled people, and for us it's not a problem. It isn't a problem. It's about, we need to support our employees to get the best out of them, and if we're supporting them, they get the best from the organisation, and they will deliver for the organisation as well. So we really don't see it as a problem. So there's an issue around disabled people being aware of their rights in the workplace. So we're aware of that as an organisation ourselves. So we've developed something called, just for you to know about, Know Your Rights. So it's about know your rights, experience your rights, live your rights. And that's all about how legislation can protect our rights within the workplace. It talks about employers' duties as well under the Equality Act, and to know that people do have rights in the workplace, along with employers' rights. But just to make sure that people are equipped really with that knowledge to know when those rights are being breached. There's something called the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. It's been ratified by UK government, which includes the Welsh government also. In there, Article 27, it has a focus on employment issues, and it actually provides an insight on what is actually needed in terms of policy and practice within the workplace to ensure that disabled people experience their rights fully along with non-disabled people. So I'd like to point you to that really, just to have a look, because it's quite a good tool to evaluate your own policies and practice within the workplace. It actually tells us what needs to be in place really, to ensure that disabled people can undertake work effectively along with everyone else. So I've talked about disability equality training, access to work. Another big issue that many disabled people are confronted with is opportunities to gain work experience. So you need work experience to be able to show that you can actually do a job, or, you know, we always need to put something on our CVs. But again, there are very few opportunities for disabled people to do that. As an organisation, we've been working with initiatives like Go Wales, and the Open University, where we've been actually providing placements for disabled students, university students, so they're actually able to gain that work experience. So later on, when they graduate, they're able to put something on their CV along with other people, along with the non-disabled people, and have something that they can, you know, show employers that we've actually gone on to, I should mention that, to employ a few people down that route, because it gives them a chance to sort of show their own light really, and then thankfully we're able to provide that employment opportunity as a result of funding. So in terms of accessibility, so I've touched on that. So accessibility is very broad. So when we talk about accessibility in terms of employment, we're talking about accessibility to the building, the work environment, accessibility to information, so the information that you provide as an organisation or employer, and access to communications. And again, things like schemes like Access to Work can help provide that provision where necessary if it's unavailable in the workplace. So I mentioned about attitudes being one of the biggest barriers. It most certainly is. I mean, there are many barriers that disabled people encounter on a daily basis, and that is inaccessible transport, inaccessible housing, lack of employment opportunities and education. The list is endless, but the biggest barrier of all is attitudes, because attitudes create those barriers. And I think, go back to when I said, where there's a will, there's a way. It most certainly is. And I think we need to try and encourage a more supportive work culture and within the workplace, and to see people's assets. So disabled people in the workplace are very valuable assets. So people bring lived experience and can really enrich the work environment and help to develop policies and have different solutions around things as well. So diversity in the workplace is most certainly the way forward. And I like to think that we're actually heading in that direction, yet we still have a long way to go. I just want to mention in terms of disabled women. So disabled women, like I said, the double whammy. So we experience gender discrimination, but we also experience discrimination in terms of being a disabled person. That has a huge impact on our self-belief, confidence, and ability to just get out there and assert ourselves. It can really hold people back. And we need to see a lot more programs that are developing skills of disabled women, the confidence, the assertiveness, ability to overcome that internalized oppression that many disabled women experience, because it does hold people back and it can have a lifelong impact many people. And just to mention as well, we've done lots of work around domestic abuse of disabled women and men, but just wanted to share a fact with you really. Disabled women are twice as likely to be a victim of domestic abuse compared to non-disabled women. So when we see domestic abuse policies within the workplace, please do think about the impact on disabled women and look out for the signs and signals that may indicate that. We've launched our manifesto, so leading up to the Senedd elections, which we're quite excited about. So part of that does have a focus on employment and increasing the employment opportunities available to disabled people in general in Wales, including the provision of training and changing attitudes. And the focus being on creating that enabling workplace rather than trying to change the individual. So I hope that's been useful to you. Please feel free to get in touch with us. We've got Facebook, Twitter, YouTube videos in relation to employment issues as well, which might be useful to you and your team. And we're very pleased to be speaking today. So thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Miranda. There's lots of useful practical advice and support there for us to think about, and lots of great advice coming from Hade as well. We've had lots of questions come through from the audience, so if anybody else has any more questions, then please pop them through. We're going to hear from Steve next, and once we've heard from Steve, we'll have a bit of a panel discussion then around the questions that are coming in from the audience. I hope that's okay with you all. So I'll now pass you over to Steve. Bear with me. There we go, Steve, you should have control now. Perfect.
Thank you very much, I hope. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that. If you want to make it into a slideshow, there we go, perfect. I'll leave it to
There
it.
you go. Okay, thanks. I'm going to talk primarily about the employment of people with learning disabilities today. But you'll find that there'll be a lot of echoes with what Miranda's said about accessibility. I've been, my current role, I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Medicine and also the lead for learning disability employment at the National Centre for Mental Health. And scarily, I've reflected recently, I've been involved in employment schemes for people with a learning disability since about 1988. I don't know if that says anything about me or says something about our lack of progress so far, but a lot to celebrate, and I'm going to go through some of that now. I think, first of all, it'd be nice if the screen would move. Hang on a sec. That's better. So a learning disability, the first thing to say is that there is no such thing as a typical person with a learning disability. The causes are a myriad. The outcomes will range greatly. So it's very difficult to predict the result of somebody having a learning disability on their learning and their ability to be employed. One of the most visible forms of learning disability is Down syndrome. And certainly you find people there who can have GCSEs through to people who will have very little receptive or expressive language. So the task becomes for people involved in vocational assessment and employment to understand how each person learns best, to understand what they may be capable of with, and I've underlined it, appropriate training. And I'll come back to what appropriate training looks like. And also to tailor our teaching, I suppose, and our support to the person's individual need. So from an employer's perspective, a learning disability can create some problems. So first of all, generally, people may have some problems with reading and writing, may have problems understanding some complex language, questions, responding, but in particular, they can have difficulty in transferring what they've learned, like a task or jobs in one environment, let's say a training environment, to another one, which might be a real job. So that weakens the case for pre-training for some, if not many, people with a learning disability. Now, of course, people can have qualifications, can get qualifications, but it doesn't mean that they can step straight into a job. Sometimes they need help to actually acclimatise to that. And what certainly helps is learning by doing. It is often a very important strategy, and often in the place where the task or the job needs to be done. And sometimes the task needs to be broken down depending on the degree of learning difficulty. So in recent years, there's been quite a critique of pre-vocational training because of the fact that very few people go through training, get qualifications, and then go on into paid work. And over the last 35 years, we've seen the development of a general model called supported employment. And here, the emphasis is on placing the person in a job first, finding the right job, training that person in those specific tasks in that specific workplace, and then maintaining their ability to work in the workplace. Now, with that has come a lot of understanding. There's a thing called vocational profiling, where you try and find out as much as possible about that person can do, what their interests are, aspirations, what they do at home, what their hobbies are. And using that to go out and then find a job with an employer that matches that person. That may involve analysing a job or a number of jobs to see if there's a decent match, but certainly a match has to be created between that workplace and that person, and a practical plan for getting that person into work. Now, once that job is found, then we can teach people with quite complex learning disabilities tasks. We can help to problem solve, and we can also help mentors and supervisors to understand how best to approach a person in their supervision and their task allocation. Now, I've put at the bottom there that a job coach is central to that. And a job coach is really the person who implements this kind of model, can find the right person and bring people to the employer that we hope would match their work and make up any gap that there is through effective training in the workplace. So the job coach can come into the workplace to help as well. And then the job isn't over. Things change, issues come up, and it's also about being there as a job coach to help to develop that person's career positively, but also to assist the person in assisting the employer in managing that. So supported employment is the model that we've adopted in a project called Engage to Change. We've been operating now for about 4 years with lottery funding. And the aim here is to get people who are 18 to 24 into paid employment across the whole of Wales. And here are some of the people that we've been working with over that period. It's a partnership. The partnership's led by Learning Disability Wales. The job coach providers, if you like, are Elite Employment Services, who work in the south and the southwest. Their equivalent in the north, Godiad, who work in the north and the northwest. All Welsh People First is a partner that helps us to make sure that what we're doing fits in with people's needs. I and my team from Cardiff University, the National Centre for Health, are carrying out evaluation of it. And we also have a Project Search as a partner who've helped us to develop a series of internships as well. So as well as a main placement side to the organisation, we've also got now 7 one-year internship programs where about 10 to 12 young people will go with a large employer for a year and hopefully end up with a job at the end of it. Up until the pandemic hit with a vengeance last summer, we worked with 610 people with learning disabilities or autistic spectrum conditions. Now, we also provide a service for people there. It's about 50-50 at the moment, but it's also worth knowing that people with autistic spectrum conditions can also have a learning disability as well. So there is some overlap there. During that time, we've arranged 388 paid work placements for people, and 224 people have got a paid job. There's quite a wide range of jobs, quite a wide range of sectors within that. And the jobs are of good quality. You know, these are not 1 hour a week jobs. These are jobs of substantial jobs for substantial periods at a minimum wage or above. We've been very keen to represent employer satisfaction, what the perspective is for them on these kind of placements and jobs. So we've had feedback so far from nearly 400 employers. The graph on the left shows various areas of performance that we've asked employers about. Red and purple are positive responses, and the greys are negative responses. So certainly, as you can see, the red and the purple outweigh throughout. So people are generally very satisfied with these issues, following safety rules, the working skills that people have, being able to follow instructions, particularly people's attendance records and punctuality. And we'll come back to that as an employer benefit in a short while. Their quality and quantity of work, again, positive responses. The only area where there might be a significant element of dissatisfaction is with initiative. And that's one of the issues that I think for employment organisations is helping people to be more flexible and take more initiative in their work where it's needed. So we're very pleased with the level of employer feedback we've got on the people that we've placed with them to work. Employer reactions, verbal reactions have also been very good. 68% of our employers have said that having an employee with a learning disability or autism has had a positive effect on the productivity of other staff, which is interesting. So it's helped the team to be more productive. 72% said that it's had a positive effect on the attitudes of other staff in work. 81% of employers said that employing a person had a positive effect on their company's approach to creating a diverse workforce. Certainly made a contribution there. 71% said it had a positive effect on their public image, and 65% a positive effect on their customers. And there's a quote at the bottom there, which is pretty typical of the kind of feedback that you get from people and employers. So from an employer point of view, let's move on to what the benefits might be. Why employ people with learning disabilities? And again, here's a selection of people working in the NHS and in companies across Wales. It's important to distinguish between employers who've had experience of employing people from those who don't, and you get a different reaction from the two. Where people have had experience of employing people, they have, in research has shown that they have very positive views about their employability and performance. And here's a list here of the areas that people are pleased with, and some of that links to our own research as well. Attendance, arriving at work, taking breaks on time, accepting authority, being accepted by the public, which is often something that employers worry about. Dedication, the involvement of job coach assistants also are positive. Lower turnover rates, willingness to learn, high job satisfaction, unlikely to cause trouble, friendliness, honesty, hardworking, strength enough to do the job, good timekeeping, etc. So we've had some very good feedback over the years about people with learning disabilities where the employer has had that experience. There's the last quote there, or the last point there, employers with experience of employing people with developmental disabilities, which broadly covers learning disability and autism, have identified advantages at double the rate of employers who hadn't had that experience. You'll see MenCaps appeared in the logos on the top right because a lot of this information came from a review of the evidence we did with them a couple of years ago. So the level of support that employers get is also important to this level of positive perception. So if you look at the left-hand side of this diagram, the support model, the first box is supportive competitive employment services, including job coach services. So broadly, that place, train and maintain model that I showed you earlier. And when that's in place, we find positive employer assessments in these areas of work behaviour, attendance, arrival and departure, good safety record, which is important, and also good responses for employers on acceptance by the public. And when compared to other staff, you also see lower staff turnover for people with learning disabilities and better overall assessment. Now, some of that positive is also there if you just have job placement services rather than job coaches coming into the workplace. So you see there an overall positive employer assessment, and again, some benefits for lower staff turnover and overall assessment compared to other staff. But where people have been placed without those kind of services, we get negative responses. Because people are on their own, the employer's on their own, and there can be difficulties that arise that they find it difficult on both sides to cope with. So I think having the right sort of support model is really important to positive outcomes for both the person and the employer. When we asked, or when people have asked in the past whether employers would employ a worker with a learning disability, it's interesting to note that it wasn't just about the person's ability to do the job, task performance. Employers were also found it, or were really concentrating on the person having a high probability of attending regularly and being in long-term employment, for the obvious reasons that it costs you money and it takes you time to re-employ people. So going with that, the availability of on-site training was a factor in their willingness to recruit. Also having a person to call on for assistance going forward. And it's a significant number of employers that have given that feedback, 84 in this particular case. All of the references are at the back of this presentation, and no doubt this will be available through Chwarae and the network. Another important factor in considering recruitment is the presence of employment specialists or job coaches on site. In other words, people who can come through your door and work with you to make sure that the person settles in and ends up doing the job to your level of quality. And finally, one of the findings was that employees with a learning disability are more likely to get higher ratings by employers if the employer sees there's been a good employee job match. And of course, you know, I suspect if you're an employer, you're not having people with learning disabilities knocking down your door for jobs. What some of these agencies that provide job coaching do is that they bring the right person to ask for a job or to come for a vacancy, rather than you having to intuit it from a low starting point. Interestingly, there also seem to be economic benefits for employers, and this largely comes through things like sickness and absence. So a large piece of research here in Australia showed that people with learning disabilities, it's a group of people, again, it's like developmental disabilities, so half of the people in the group had learning disabilities. So we believe these apply. That people in this category were absent 62% less, or at 62% of their non-disabled co-worker comparisons. Sickness costs were at about a third of those of non-disabled workers, and the cost of recruitment, or should we say re-recruitment, rehiring people, was down at 13% because people stay longer. Some figures here as well, 643 Australian employers, and they found that recruitment costs were lower for people with learning disabilities, $1,079 for non-disabled compared with $141, again because of that reduced turnover. And sickness days were marginally less, but you could put a figure on it in terms of the cost of covering people. So good from that point of view. So it's worth summarising. Employers with experience of employing people with a learning disability rated them more positively than non-disabled people in terms of low job turnover. Also, more positive contributions to higher productivity, lower absenteeism, and higher job retention rates. So by employing people with a learning disability, employers are more likely to generate cost savings by their staying in jobs longer, and reduced recruitment and training costs when compared to other workers. In terms of workforce cohesion, it's interesting that the presence of people with learning disabilities in the workforce can contribute to the social connectedness of the general team. So here, this piece of research showed that co-workers can become invested in the success of that person. And that leads to greater social integration with the person, better relationships and cooperations between all the co-workers themselves. And there's measured impact on company morale, also an important factor in deciding to employ people for some employers. Other benefits, having a more diverse workforce, better co-worker relationships, mentioned by 20% of employers in another study, and improved attitudes in the company, reported by 10% of employers. And those benefits being at twice the level of those who've hired people than those who had no experience of it. And so a quote at the bottom here from a study: many employers continue their commitment to workforce diversity as a strategy for increasing the productivity and the competitiveness of their company. The presence of workers with developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, actually increases the ability of a company to contend with its competitors. So the argument here from researchers is that there are concrete outcomes from that investment in diversity that are tangible and beneficial for the company. We talked about public image earlier. And this is about disability generally. There aren't many customer surveys of around people with learning disabilities, but those surveys reveal that that customers, 75% of those customers had direct experience of a person with a disability in a work environment and had positive experiences as a result. 92% of consumers interviewed felt more favourable toward companies that hired people with disabilities. 87% specifically agreed that they would prefer to give their business to companies that hire people with disabilities. And also all the respondents believe that companies hiring workers with disabilities cared about their workers. So it can have, particularly in public facing companies, it can have real rewards with the customer base that again, I think can be turned into tangible benefits. People often think about accidents. Will people with learning disabilities have accidents more? Well, if you look on this table here, if you look at occupational health incidents and the cost of those, worker compensation incidents and the cost of those, and also accumulated insurance costs, these percentages are the percentage of people with learning disabilities compared with those of non-disabled co-workers. So their costs in all of these areas and their accidents in all of these areas were much, much lower than non-disabled workers. This big 8-year study in Canada actually showed that there were roughly a third of the full-time equivalent injuries per person for a person with a learning disability compared to non-disabled workers. That's a real gold standard study. And a further study, employing a person with a learning disability does not result in an increase in health insurance rates either, as we would expect. They're normal workers, why would they lead to greater insurance premiums? So that's very good, that actually, if anything, the risks involved of hiring a person with a learning disabilities are lower than those for non-disabled people. So in the final section of this presentation, what can employers do to help people with a learning disability become employed? And this is roughly split into 3. The first one is attracting candidates. Again, we said they're probably not all knocking down your door to get a job, but that's quite often they don't know what the jobs look like in your company. So to attract great candidates, employers can and should make information about what they do and the jobs they have accessible and also available to people in the third sector as well, so that people can get to understand what your business looks like. Again, I think we've described right at the beginning that people with a learning disability are practical, straightforward, and they respond to clear descriptions of what jobs need people to do, rather than a big list of qualifications. So clearly, what do you want me to do is a really good thing to do to try and attract people who may be able to do that. Making sure initial contact is positive and encouraging will help. giving positive feedback when people are unsuccessful in a job application can also help them, because it makes them clearly better candidates next time round. To bring people to your door, you need to build partnerships with others who can help. We've in Engage to Change got 2 support employment agencies and a lot of PR. There are lots of third sector organisations that represent people with a learning disability and other disabilities out there who can make recommendations that people should come to you as an actively engaged employer. Also, these days, the website is the first place that people go to look. So if you can make it as simple to read as possible, it will help people with learning disabilities, but everyone else. What works for people with learning disabilities often works for people with low level of literacy, people who have English as a second language, etc. So recruitment and selection. It's important to try and achieve some face-to-face contact between recruiters, operational managers and potential disabled employees. Usually that's put at an arm's length, but we've had great success in having employers allow people to come and look around, have a tour, see what people do in this place. It's also helpful to provide advice and assistance on how to fill in an application form, to complete a CV or to get an interview within your company. The easier the access to that, the better. The more we can move to job specifications that specify core competencies and interviews rather than surrogates like 5 GCSEs or a driving license when you don't need anyone to drive to do the job. That will help. And broadly making recruitment materials more accessible, using simple language or pictures to aid understanding, and perhaps even accepting a CV rather than an application form where somebody can tell you broadly what they're able to do, and that might lead you to interview to get more detail. Certainly there are now organisations, not least Learning Disability Wales, that can help with accessible versions of documents. It's nice to have a named person who can help somebody through the recruitment process, and that might be, with a favoured supported employment organisation, for example, who could handle those kind of recruitments. It's good to take wider experience into account. One of the defining qualities of people is they won't have had work experience when they were at school. They may not have had the same kind of experiences as people of a similar age. So surrogates for that can be hobbies, their interests, things that just show a level of their competency rather than just asking for previous jobs. If you are interviewing people, then it's always useful to help, if it's wanted, a supporter at the interview who can help focus questions, maybe probe a little bit more in language that the person will understand. Help make the atmosphere as formal as possible. I mean, it's bad enough for anybody standing there across the table from 5 people in suits. If the panel is small and formal, that helps. And also the use of plain language, where you can take your time to ensure that the person has understood. But we've had a lot of success more recently with work trials. So in other words, giving somebody in an agency time to train a person in a job and then seeing whether they can do that as their interview, because people who are good at jobs can be very bad at interviews. In terms of training and induction, people may need a little bit more time, a little bit more supervision. People can benefit from having a mentor. We've certainly used that within Cardiff University very well with people on internship programs, where they can model good, how the job is done, and they can also are people they can go to with a problem. But I would particularly encourage anyone who's interested in diversifying in this way to call on specialist support from job coaching companies. Engage to Change is still working for another 18 months. There's always a referral route there. We've already heard again from Miranda that Access to Work can provide money that can pay for job coaches as well through a skilled company. And no doubt the Hive network itself can assist with that. I'm going to just quit at that point, I think. And with this last point, that people with a learning disability can work if they have the right support. And employers can find competent, valued and loyal workers when the job match is right and the support is in place. So that's the kind of takeaway message, I think. For anyone who wants more information, the Good for Business guide can be found through MenCap, which has got a lot of that information about employer benefits. Those are my contacts, and also Engage to Change if anyone wants more information about what Engage to Change can offer in terms of job coach support. Also, there's a document that's available through BASE, Valued in Public, which has got all of the tips that I've put in the back end of this, plus more that's freely available to you to download. And there's a whole bunch of references that you needn't worry about, but if you're that way inclined, they're all there for you to follow up on the research that we did.